All right, I want to give you a couple of hints on this problem. So I know some of you are math phobes. This is not a horrible math problem, and I think it's kind of interesting to look at. So I want to show you, maybe it makes a little more sense. So don't panic yet. We're not gonna worry about this. Block that out of your brain. So this is the way we're calculating pi. So, or one method we can use. So this says we're starting with 1. So if I look down here, number of terms 1, we're going to end up with 4. So we would cut out all of this stuff here. So we're going to do 2 iterations. So we're going to minus 1/3 plus 1/5. So that's iteration 1. This is a second iteration. So we subtract and then add. And it follows this pattern. So every time we add and subtract, we change this denominator. So remember, D for down. So numerator is going to stay the same, but our denominator here is going to increase by 2 every time. And we're going to alternate whether we add it or we subtract it. All right, so in our loops, and here's kind of our baseline. And if you notice that the numbers you're going to generate are going to be very similar to this. So what we need to do then is we need to start out with a couple of numbers and a couple of things that we can start out with. So I have too many things open here, apparently. Is that this one? No. Thank you for logging me out thing. All right, close that. All right, here we go. All right, so we know we need a value to start with. So we know at some point our numerator, so easily enough, is going to be equal to 1. And that's our top number. Remember, numerator on top, denominator on bottom. Well, our denominator is going to start at 1, so we can assign it a value ahead of time. And we need to start with our value for pi. And we can start with pi equals 0 to start with. So now we have all these values. We also need to know how many times we're going to add this series. So the term we use is iterations. So I'm just going to say iterations equals 10. Now, here you should probably ask, because that's the format, but I want to see if we can come up with some of the math for it. So we know that we have a set number of loops. We set up here, this is a number of iterations. So again, if it's a set loop, I'm probably going to use some kind of a for loop for, and again, I might just use X, but X isn't very explanatory. So I would probably use something a little better than that. So X in range iterations. So in other words, this is going to run as many times as that value that we've set. So we need to think about how we're going to add it and how we're going to subtract it. All right. So if I look at this formula, so 1 minus 1/3 plus 1/5. So how could we each time we loop, we know that denominator is going to change. So we might want to think about that a little bit. So we're going to start, pi is equal to 0. So we need to create a formula that will work very similar to this. The one tricky piece is we need to also think about it in terms of we have to isolate pi over here. So remember our math. If we're dividing by 4, then we multiply this side of the equation by 4. So that might be a piece to think about and remember. So at least at some point. Now I would probably put that all the way at the end. So inside of our loop, we're only concerning ourselves with this piece of the equation. Does that make sense? So we're going to calculate this piece, and then outside of the loop, I'm going to take pi, or whatever value I'm looking at as pi, times 4. And that's going to move it then from the left side to the right side. So my output's going to be this. So pi times 4. In this loop, I need to figure out how I can start this operation. So I know that first iteration, so if I have one iteration, I'm going to figure out a way to do one. So I'm taking 1, and I'm not doing anything to it. So these values are all going to be 0. So that's kind of an important consideration. So if I only have one iteration, I really have pi is equal to 4, because it's 1 times 4. We'll get that 1 right here will still show up. I know, it's a little confusing. So I might say pi then is going to be equal to pi, and we have to do something with it. So we're going to add a value to it. So here we're going to add this value here. So when I first run this, the numerator and the denominator are both 1. And so if I divide 1 by 1, I get a value of 1. Does that make sense? Well, I don't want to use the numbers. I want to use numerator divided by denominator. So first time through, I've now added 1 to my value for pi. It started out as